Hey now Brawlers, today we're going to take a second look at Tragedy Looper from designer Bakafire and North American publisher Z-Man Games. The original Japanese edition of this game, I believe, is from publisher Japan Brand, if I'm not mistaken, and I actually already reviewed that edition earlier in the year, like January to March or somewhere in there, and I gave it a good review. I thought it was an incredibly interesting and innovative game. I'm not totally happy with the way my review was because I felt like I didn't clearly explain what I thought was so cool about it and some of the faults that the game might have, because I played it a few times, but it really is a deep kind of overwhelming experience, and I feel like I probably didn't have my feet under me, and the English rules that I had that were sort of not translated very well from Japanese really didn't help the situation too much. So I was eager to get a full official North American release of this game to see if they might change anything to streamline it, or at least if the rules were better. Well, they didn't really change anything, I'll say that right off the bat, but the rules are better. So if you're not familiar with Tragedy Looper, I'll take a step back and explain. This is a competitive game for 2 to 4 players, and it's a 1 versus all game. So one player takes control of the mastermind who's trying to foil the rest of the players who are the protagonists. And they use these sort of general terms because there's no real set story to this game. It's got a sort of an anime manga art style to it, but really you're just supposed to be people running around a city trying to prevent a tragedy. The mastermind is trying to keep these tragedies happening time after time. So it could be murder, it could be suicide, or any mixture of the two. At the beginning of the game, the protagonists are running around the city just trying to stop the mastermind, not knowing, just knowing that something's going to happen, but not knowing who, not knowing, what exactly, and not knowing what they need to do to prevent this. And chances are you're going to fail because you have zero information at the beginning. But you have the power to go back in time. You can loop back and start again a certain amount of times. If you can try and figure out the mystery and guess what's going on and prevent the tragedy from happening even one time within the time limit of each loop, the protagonist will win the game. But the mastermind is trying to prevent that at every turn, and if he can essentially run out the clock on you and make every one of your loops fail, the mastermind will win. Sounds kind of crazy, right? And it is, but it's really not, gameplay-wise, it's not as difficult as it sounds to pick up. It just takes a little getting used to. So let me give you an overview of the game. There's going to be a lot to this game that I can't talk about because it's going to give spoilers. This game works off of scripts for the mastermind, and I can't give you too much information or I'll ruin it. So it's going to be kind of a weird overview, but I'll do my best to get to you the basic concepts of how it works. Then we're going to come back and I'll tell you my final opinion. Okay, I'm going to try to give you a very brief overview of Tragedy Looper. Now, like I said going into this from the intro, I cannot say a lot about the very specific elements of the stories of this game because the game works off of scripts, and they're preset scripts unless you make your own, so I would be spoiling things pretty heavily if I were to tell you all the details. So I'm just going to use a very basic, general sort of random setup here just to try to teach you some of the different elements of the game and give you an idea of how it plays. Now, this is a competitive game for 2 to 4 players. One player takes control of the mastermind who is working against the other players who are known as the protagonists. Now, even if you play with less than 4 players, the protagonist will just have multiple sets of the action cards. So the same amount of actions are always going to be played in every game. It just might be less players who are actually taking those actions. They'll just swap the decks back and forth between each other each round, and at least one player will be playing multiple cards. Now, the theme of the game is that the mastermind is orchestrating a tragedy. It might be murder, it might be suicide, it might be both, but he or she is trying to make very, very bad things happen in this area of Japan, presumably Japan. You have a shrine, a school, a city, and a hospital, and there's all these characters represented by cards who are moving around to the different parts of this region, and something terrible is going to happen to at least one of them. The protagonists know that something bad is going to happen. They may even know the days that it's going to happen, but they don't know how, they don't know who, they don't know how to stop it. And they have no information at the beginning, but they have to try and get information to prevent these tragedies. But inevitably, especially right in the beginning, they are going to fail because they just don't know enough. But they have the ability to travel back in time. They can loop back, start another loop, and remember the information that they had before and try to stop the mastermind this time around. The protagonists win if they can prevent the tragedy happening even one time. If you can make it through an entire loop, which is made up of a certain amount of days, without one of the bad game-ending conditions happening, you and the rest of the protagonists will win the game. The mastermind has to make sure that these bad things happen loop after loop after loop. However many loops are in the game, which could be anywhere from 1 to 4, or 2 to 4 or 5, or perhaps even more if you do a custom game. However many loops there are, you have to make sure that the bad things happen every single time. And if you do, the protagonist will lose, except that they get one final guess in the full version of the game to try and guess what all the key roles of all the characters are. Who's the killer? Who's the serial killer? Who is the key person? Who is the sort of crux of all these bad things that are potentially going to happen? If they can get that final guess absolutely correct, they can win the game. If not, they will ultimately lose. So, how is all of this going to work? It sounds like a lot to take in. Well, during setup, the first thing you need to do is figure out who's going to be the mastermind, who's going to be the protagonist. Every player is going to, including the mastermind, is going to get a set of cards. These are the action cards you're going to use throughout the game to influence people, the locations, and all the people out in the different regions. There's no pawns representing the protagonist or the mastermind. You're just considered to sort of be omnipresent, just running around from different locations frequently, influencing all the different people in the city. Every protagonist will also get their own set of cards, and like I said, if you're playing with less players, more than one person might have to take more than one set of the cards. And then it all comes down to the scripts. Now, there are 2 books that come with this game. You have the Player's Handbook, with which both the mastermind and the protagonist need to familiarize themselves with. These are all the basic rules of the game. But there is another book called the Mastermind's Handbook, which only, of course, the mastermind gets to see. The front part of the book is actually some very useful tips and walkthroughs for teaching the game, because the game can be very difficult to teach. But most of the book is actually pre-made scripts that you're going to be running the protagonist through, detailing different tragedies and things that you're trying to make happen. And so therefore, those are for your eyes only. But those scripts are going to tell you about the rest of the setup, what characters you're using, where they are. Although for the most part, characters will start off in certain points, like the class rep and the rich man's daughter and the boy student. There's a girl student as well. These are not all the characters that are in the game. They're always going to start off in the school unless the script says otherwise, whereas the Shrine Maiden, of course, will start in the shrine most times. You even have an alien, and you have a doctor and a patient who are over in the hospital. And remember that these characters and their placement may change from script to script. It totally depends on what the story is for that applicable script. So once you have all that set up, the mastermind has set up the board with whatever's going to go out there. And remember, the mastermind has all of the information. Then the game is going to start, and now it's the protagonist's job to figure out what the heck is going on out here. Now, you have a separate board over here, which is basically going to keep track of the stats of the game. You have days, you have incidents, you have loops, and then you have an extra gauge, and this is where the customizable part of the game comes in. You actually have a whole extra gauge that you can use for whatever you want. If you made your own script, you can have that signify whatever, earthquakes, number of earthquakes that have occurred. I mean, any kind of weird thing that you want. And you even have extra little tokens and chips to signify different things that you want to be happening during the game. And even extra cards as well that might just signify certain things in your personal script. But in every script, no matter whether it's a customizable one or a preset one, you're going to have the day, incident, and loop. The loop is going to be how many times the protagonists have, how many go-throughs they have before they're going to fail. So you'll set that at a certain point. Let's say that we set this at 3. So they have 3 loops to get it right, the protagonist, to figure out what's going on to prevent a tragedy, or to at least figure out what every single role is of all the characters who are in play. Every time that you go through a certain amount of days, which you will also preset, I like to use this to block off however many there are. So let's say there's 5 days per loop. You'll keep going through days, which signify rounds of gameplay. Whenever you get to the end of the final day, if the protagonists have finally prevented the tragedy completely, then that will be the end. But if they haven't, if something bad happens anywhere from day 1 to day 5 in this example, then the loop is going to start back, and you'll lose 1 loop, and you're down again, and you're running out of time to make this work. Now, you also have incidents. Incidents are going to be public information. The players know that something bad is going to happen when there are these little markers signifying when incidents will happen. So let's say that on day 2 and day 5, you know that a murder or a suicide or something is going to happen. You just don't know the exact circumstances. You just know on those days you have to be on the lookout for something. And what's going to help you out here are these little cards called the script cards for both the protagonist and mastermind that will remind you of what incidents you're using, what characters are in play. I really don't want to show you the other side. Okay, real quick, because I don't want to give any spoilers away. But those are just a helpful reminder of some of the basic concepts of the game. So once you have all these things set, then you're going to begin. Now, the typical turn, you have the morning phase, and that'll be detailed down here on the bottom of the board as well as a reminder. The morning phase is really just cleanup perhaps for the mastermind. The mastermind might have certain effects in the script that only happen during the morning. Then it's down to playing cards. Now, let's take a look at these cards real quick. And like I said, the mastermind and protagonist have most of the same cards, but there are some different ones. So, for instance, the mastermind has a card called Paranoia +1. Let's let them add these little paranoia counters on the characters. Now, all the characters have these paranoia ratings up in the top corner of their card. You'll see a number of tokens plus a little stylized number there. When a paranoia threshold is reached, when there's at least that many tokens on them, then certain things may happen depending on character roles and abilities. Let's say, for instance, a certain amount of paranoia needs to be on a character to enable that character to kill another character. That's just a very startling example of what might happen. Or when a certain amount of paranoia is on a character, they might flee to another part of the region. You just never know. You also have intrigue. This functions somewhat similar to the paranoia counters in that this can, once you meet a certain level of intrigue, something may happen. But this can be on either characters or a location. So it's just another extra level of, intrigue of what might happen. And you have intrigue tokens to keep track of that as well. There's a 1 and a 3. Then there are, let's come up with another example. You have minus paranoia cards as well. These are all the mastermind cards we're looking at, because even the mastermind might want to remove paranoia to keep certain things from happening. And they come in different denominations. Whenever you see a different little time loop symbol here that matches up with the time loop token, that means this can only be used once per loop. You don't get access to that card again until you come to a new one. Then you also have movement cards as well. You have horizontal movement. You have diagonal movement, which is only usable once per loop. And you have horizontal movement as well. Vertical, horizontal. Okay, I probably got this confused. But then you have forbidden. Whenever you do that, the characters will move in the applicable direction. Then you have the forbid cards, forbid goodwill and forbid paranoia. You play these on someone, they take precedence after, even if someone plays the same goodwill or paranoia card, to add it at that same time, these will forbid that from happening. Now, when I say playing cards, I mean that first the mastermind is actually going to take those cards and put 3 of them down at certain spots of the board, either a location or on a character. Now, you could even play cards, if you're the mastermind, down as a bluff. Like, let's say that you just want people to think that you're about to add intrigue to a location. You could put a movement card down on a location. And it's not going to do anything. It's just a dead card, but it made people think that you were going to perhaps add intrigue there. So you kind of bluff them out. Once you've added cards on, I'm just putting random cards out here. Once you've put down cards wherever you want to, now the protagonists have the opportunity to react as well. And they get to put down 1 card for each of them too. Now there's a few limitations here. First off, while the protagonists can put down cards on the same spots that you have put down cards, they cannot double up on their own cards. They have to put their own action cards down on different spots. Also, they have powerful forbid cards as well, like the forbid movements. The forbid intrigue one is the one that I'm referring to. But if more than one player plays a forbid intrigue at the same time, they cancel each other out. So the trick here, though, is that in a normal game of Tragedy Looper, you are only allowed to talk to the other protagonists in between loops, not during a loop. So it can be very difficult for you to plan and coordinate during the course of the game what cards you should be playing based on what the mastermind played down onto. So you kind of have to play your cards with hoping on a wing and a prayer that you're actually going to get the desired effect. And remember that your whole goal here is really just to prevent a tragedy from happening. In the beginning, you may not have information, but on later turns, you may want to cancel out movement to keep a certain character from moving to a certain spot because that caused a death or some other bad thing or causing paranoia. If you know that when a lot of paranoia is on someone, it triggers an event, you might forbid paranoia to keep that from happening. Now, there's another type of card that the protagonists have access to that I probably just put out here on the board. Yes, the Goodwill card. This comes in +1 and +2. This is +2 cards are only usable once per loop. Now, Goodwill is a currency that only the protagonists have access to with these little heart tokens, and although the mastermind can forbid it. But when you put Goodwill on a person, that you're basically earning trust with them and loyalty. And when you have enough of it on a character, you're actually going to be able to trigger their abilities. Whoever is the current leader of the protagonist at that turn, which will swap from round to round, is going to be able to use abilities when you meet an applicable threshold of Goodwill. So, for instance, the alien, when you have 4 Goodwill, can kill any character in this location once per loop. But for 5 Goodwill, she can revive a corpse in this location. The boy student. For 2 Goodwill, you can remove a paranoia from any other student in this location. The journalist. For 2 Goodwill, you can put a paranoia in any other character. So he's sort of telling stories that are building up paranoia in the populace. Or for 2, you can put 1 intrigue on this location or any character in this location. The doctor. For 2, you can remove or add a paranoia to any other character in this location. For 3, the patient may go outside of the hospital for the rest of the loop. So every character is different. Every character has different special abilities. And as the protagonist, you want to utilize those abilities, even though once you get to the end of the loop, everything gets wiped away, including Goodwill tokens, because for those characters, time has reset. They don't remember you. So it's an interesting thematic thing there. But in any case, once everyone has played their cards, the mastermind has put down cards, the protagonists have put down cards, you're going to flip over all the cards simultaneously and resolve their effects. If more than 1 movement card of the same type goes onto a character, they will both happen. They'll just merge together. So if I played 2 horizontal movement, if 2 horizontal movement cards were played on a character, that character moves horizontally. But if a horizontal and vertical card are played simultaneously on the same character, that character moves diagonally instead. Knowing that some characters are not allowed to move to certain locations, like the Shrine Maiden can never go to the city. So there's a lot of little rules and things to keep track of. Once you've resolved all of the cards, then it's time for the mastermind to do some fact checking. Because at this point, certain incidents might happen. Someone might die. Someone might get an extra paranoia token on them because all the characters have hidden roles that are going to give them special abilities. And every player in the game is going to have this little cheat sheet here that details all of the different roles in the game and what they might do, whether it's a basic tragedy or the first steps introductory scenario. You're going to have to look at this sheet, see what happens on the board, and say, oh, wait, a paranoia token just popped out for no reason after we resolved cards. That character must be blank. You know, it could be the conspiracy theorist who just put paranoia on characters. So now we know that one person in that area might be the conspiracy theorist. These are the sort of deductions that the protagonists have to do. But if in that loop something happens, something like a murder or another type of incident that leads to a bad ending, then you have lost. The mastermind says, you have lost this loop. We are resetting. Everything goes back to the way it was. Characters go back to the way they were. Everyone takes back their cards. All the tokens are wiped out. You move the loop down and you do it again. And now the pressure's on. You have less time, but you have more information in trying to prevent this tragedy and trying to defeat the mastermind. And that's really the game. I could go on and on, but because there's a lot of little details to this, but for the most part, it is the mastermind trying to make his script happen, make his tragedy happen, trying to play the right cards at the right time to foil the protagonist, while the protagonists try to foil the mastermind even just one time. Now, let's go to my final thoughts. So I mentioned in my intro that I was not totally satisfied with my original review because I thought that even though I'd played it, which in my mind at the time was enough times to get a feel of the game, it still felt kind of overwhelming. I didn't know if maybe I was just biased to the game because it was so innovative and so new and so fresh, and it was an imported Japanese game, which was so cool. Being a fan of Japanese culture for so long, it was just, and now being into board games and having that game was just so cool, and I liked the art style and all of that stuff. Well, at the same time, I played the game originally with a couple of different groups of people, and I got some positive responses, but for the most part, from at least the first group I played it with, it was a very negative response. And I was like, wow, am I the one that's wrong here? Am I just not seeing this for what it is? So when I got the new English edition, I was like, okay, new rules, starting fresh. It's been a little while since I played that one. Let's take another go at this. And after playing it a couple times, I am very gratified to know that, in my opinion, I was right the first time. This is an awesome game. But it's an awesome game, like I said in my original review, that is not going to be for everyone. I would wager that there's a large sector of the gaming population who will not really enjoy this game. I was about to say appreciate this game for what it is, but really, your opinion is your opinion, and this is going to be a divisive game, and so you just might not enjoy it because it mixes together several different game types into one box. And those game types can be pretty divisive in and of themselves, and you're putting them all together. Those would be one versus all games, where one player has to work together against everyone else at the table. Deduction games, where you're trying to, it's like a puzzle that you're trying to solve out that someone else already knows, but you don't know, and it's like it can be kind of frustrating at times. And also, it's semi-cooperative. You have a part of the table that's working together, and maybe you don't want to be working together. You just want to be totally combative with each other. But when you have multiple, more than one protagonist in this game, you need to be constantly sharing information when allowed, because you will not win if you don't. It is very, very difficult. And at the same time, you have other concepts at work. It's the whole time travel concept of essentially setting yourself up for failure over and over again. Some people are very, very competitive to the point where if you're in the very first loop, I've seen people get upset. Like, well, wait, what? That's not supposed to work like that. What do you mean we lost? We can't have lost already. I didn't have a chance to pull off some cool combo with my cards. Well, that's not how this game works. This is also a storytelling game, another type of game that people sometimes are on one side of the fence or the other about. But it mixes all these different elements together into something that I think makes it work, because I don't necessarily always like all those different types of games. But this just takes the best parts of those, I believe, and makes it work. Now, let's start from the beginning and try to make this a proper review. Theme and components. I love the theme. That's obvious. Even if you don't necessarily like the gameplay of this, or from what you've heard of the gameplay, you're not a fan of it. It's a cool, innovative concept. Not really a lot of games have been able to, maybe no games have been able to pull off that time travel mechanic. And whether you think this is successful or not, I think it's a laudable goal to have that as a theme. I think it's awesome, and especially for this one, the idea of someone just like, I don't know what he's supposed to be, immortal puppet master, just making all the people in the city dance to his whims throughout time and space, while the other players are like this plucky protagonist with like no special powers or anything, who just have to try over and over again. Their only special power is that they remember that they screwed up the last time, and they have to use that information. So that theme is awesome. I think that's irrefutable. As far as the components in the graphic design, I'm a big fan of the anime style. I just am. I don't think there's enough of it. It's sad that this isn't based on an actual anime. But so I'm a fan there. But I've already heard people complaining like, of the new edition, like, oh man, this is the new hotness, but I wish I could get it, but it's got this dumb anime theme. Well, there's just no, you're either going to like it or you don't. I happen to like it, and I think there's enough people that will either enjoy that theme or that artwork, or just not care about it to sort of get past that. As far as the actual physical components, the boards are cool. They were good in the first edition as well, the original Japanese edition. I was hoping some of the other things would be improved, like the tokens and the design on the backs of the cards, things like that. All of that stayed exactly the same as the original, so that was kind of a bummer, but I didn't expect a huge graphical overhaul. And Z-Man likes putting out these games in these this size of box and keeping it compact, so it wasn't a total surprise to me. The rule books, and I mentioned this before in my intro, they did redo the rule books, and it's much, much better. They're still a bear to get through. I don't know if I can blame that on the people that edited the rule book, or just the nature of the game itself, that it is dense to get through. The protagonist and the mastermind have to go, in my opinion, through the main rule book, the player's handbook, essentially, from front to back. They just have to. It's going to make it so much easier if they do. I made some of my players do it, and it just made the whole thing much easier to get through, just with getting the concepts across and getting all the basics out, and then you only have to look up a few things as the game goes on. The Masterminds book is much better in this one because it has the whole section about teaching the game to new players. So in one of the games, I had the I was able to have people look at the rule books ahead of time. But for another game that I wasn't able to, at least this helped me explain things in a certain order, give examples. You still have to go over that ahead of time if you're the mastermind, but it works out. And then as far as how the actual mastermind scripts are set out, it's pretty clear. I'm not totally okay with how some of the scripts were laid out, as far as, especially like the introductory script. It's supposed to be the introductory script that helps people really get into the game and learn the game, and it was still a little bit jumbled. So that probably needs some work, but again, this is just a really heady game. I don't know if they could have done much better than what they did. I am happy that they have the script cards for the protagonist and for the mastermind to remind you of the basic stuff. I don't believe they had that in the original Japanese edition that I remember, so that's a cool thing. I'm still not a fan of the sheets of paper for the reminders. I think they could have at least put that on some cards, or at least some decent card stock, because they're really flimsy, and I can imagine if you play this game enough, they're going to get destroyed, so you probably might even want to laminate them. I don't know. But anyways, I like the theme. I love the theme. Artwork for me is good, and the components are average, is what I would put that at. Now, for the gameplay. Once you get past the whole concept of this, the gameplay is actually very simple. It's just card play. For the mastermind, you get to play your cards first, and then for the protagonist, it's mostly simultaneous card play. The thing is whether you have table talk off or on, and when you get into the main game, once you're done learning it, definitely turn table talk off. Because otherwise, once the protagonist, if you're the mastermind, the protagonist, once they get the rules of the game, and they know what they're doing, they're just going to cream you every time if you have that table talk on. That's my opinion. So once you take that away, what it comes down to is just sort of looking at each other in secret and putting down cards. It's all very simple, and then the simultaneous reveal and then seeing what happens. I could argue that is one of the best parts about this game, because even as the mastermind gets to put his stuff out first. And in a way, it's kind of relieving, because especially when I was a mastermind, I was like, okay, whatever I've done, I've done. I can't do anything about it. So I'm just going to wait and see what they put out, or watch what they put out and where they put out. Try to make a guess before we flip it over, and what happens, happens. There's nothing I can do. So it's very tense, but it's very cool and exciting to see if they're going to follow their plans, or if they totally went in the opposite direction. And when there's just a total conflict, or when the best part is when you put the same card on that the protagonists do. Like, I want this person to move vertically. Oh, look, you put a move vertical card too. And they're like, wait, what? You wanted to do that? That's great. There are a lot of moments like this in this game. So I don't think that while the mechanics are not very complicated, it works together with, it really lets the story and the interaction between the players shine. I think it's good that it's as simple as it is. And there is some complexity too. You have, because of the wide variety of options you have with the cards, it can actually be a little AP, analysis paralysis inducing, because do you just try to prevent, get this person away from this location as fast as possible? Do I take this opportunity to actually put more loyalty down on this person, or goodwill, in order to use their special power? But are we going to have time for that? There is a lot of decision making to be had here, and even especially on the mastermind's part. The mastermind is an island unto himself, and you have to play it right. And it's an interesting thing for the mastermind too, because you're not just trying to, I think an ideal mastermind is not just trying to beat the other players. You're really trying to facilitate the story and keep them guessing and keep it very interesting, so that even if they lose loop after loop, at least they are hopeful that they know what they're doing. And it can be tricky in this game, especially in the introductory scenarios. It's very possible for the masterminds to just decimate the protagonist. But once everyone knows what they're doing and you get to the more complicated scripts, then everyone should be having a better time, because now you're on more equal footing. The mastermind has to be much more strategic. So I really enjoy the core mechanisms of the game in that regard. I like all the different characters. I haven't really delved into the customizable options of this game yet, which is a really cool thing. You could make your own script easily, and they provide enough tokens for you to make crazy scripts, and there's so many characters in the game, and it's easily expandable. I know they had some script expansions out in Japan, and I assume the game has done pretty well over here actually so far, so I assume there'll be more of those coming out for the North American edition as well. So really like all of that. I think the mechanics work very, very well with the theme. There's a good amount of tension. If you're the mastermind and you don't laugh maniacally at least once, you are not playing the game right. I don't often say that, but you need to do this. It's very, very fun. And, you know, this is one of those games where when I was the mastermind, I had fun just losing. Because, especially if it was close. Because I felt like I took the protagonist on, like, a journey. And they sussed things out for themselves, and they made it work, and they were so happy. And I don't even think it was that they were overjoyed at, like, winning and, like, shoving it in my face or anything. They were just happy that they figured this out. So that is such a cool feeling. And I've also played as the protagonist, too, and that's, you know, it can be a crippling feeling, a terrible feeling when you just don't know what's going on. But then when you rise to that challenge, it's awesome. So I think from both sides, it's a great game. I think that the mechanics work well enough. I like the theme. I like the components. And again, this is not going to be for everyone. First off, it is a bit long for what it is. There's going to be periods of just silence as people try to figure things out. It's not necessarily the fastest game. The moments of excitement are sometimes, you know, preceded by a lot of just waiting around for people to decide what they're going to do. And if you're not into this whole storytelling aspect, if you can't really get into that, and if you can't really deal with the prospect of failure over and over again, this is going to be a tough one for you and your group. But this hits a certain sweet spot for a certain type of gamer that I think I am, and I think a lot of other people will agree. But it's definitely a try before you buy. But do check it out one way or the other, because you may be pleasantly surprised. This is going to go down as the most innovative game of the year for sure, and maybe of ever. You know, it's definitely up there. Just an awesome experience. Tragedy Looper from Z-Man Games. My name is Nick. This has been Board Game Brawl, and I'm reminding you to get out there and game every day and in every way. Take care.